Welcome to the Podcast Accelerator, the thrice-weekly show that brings you podcast education, industry insights, and straight-talking reactions to podcasting news. I am your English host, Mr. Mark Asquith, the British podcast guy and CEO and co-founder of Rebel-Based Media, the podcast tech company that creates the Podcast Success Academy, podcast websites, Productivity, Rebel-Based Studios, and Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where you can actually get your first month of podcast hosting for just $1, and of course transfer an existing podcast completely free. Go and check that out at Captivate.fm. Now, today on the show, I'm going to continue talking about podcast rebranding. In particular, 3 questions to ask yourself before rebranding your podcast. And if you listen to the previous version of this theme over on the 7-Minute Mentor, you'll be surprised to hear that these questions are actually slightly different, updated through the lens of having gone through my own podcast rebrand very recently. But before I do that, just a quick heads up that the fabulous guys over at AWeber are still giving you 90 days to try their wonderful email marketing product. Now, for all of my podcasts, I will build my email list. I will help the people that want helping. And the way that I do that is by, of course, running AWeber. And I've been working with AWeber now for 6 years. And they're absolutely wonderful. They really, really understand the pulse of a podcaster. They understand really what we need as creators in order to help build and engage our audience. So please go and check it out at markasquith.com/AWeber. That's right, AWeber. Go and check it out. Now, let's talk about your rebranding, because like most things, rebranding a podcast sounds easy, but once you get started, you realize how much work there actually is to do in order to do it properly. So what I want to do is give you 3 questions that are going to help you to decide whether this is the right move for you and whether it's the right move for your show or not. Okay? Now, to put a little bit of context onto this, I kind of do this every couple of years, all right? I will upgrade my podcasts every couple of years based on your feedback, based on my life situation and my own desires. And, you know, that I believe that's a nice mix, because I've got to turn up every day and record this thing, and you've got to turn up every day and listen to this thing. So we've got to keep it fresh. Like every relationship, the relationship between you and I has to be rejuvenated, has to be given effort and care and attention. And I love doing this, and I know that you love turning up, but we have to nurture it, okay? So that's what rebranding this podcast and what rebranding our podcast can do for you. It can keep building that excitement, keep building that trust, and understanding that I'm going to do the best for you. So let me run through these 3 questions that you need to ask yourself before you embark on this journey. Number 1, what do you love about podcasting? Not what do you love about your podcast, but what do you love about podcasting? So for me, it's the planning, the content, it's the turning up and the recording. I love doing that, and like the promo and engaging with audiences, and you're engaging with Kipper and Raf and Annette and Felicia and everyone else that turns up. What do I hate about podcasting is the next question that you've got to ask yourself. What do you hate about podcasting? Well, for me, it's the editing side of things. That's why this show is, frankly, it's not edited. It's recorded straight into the Rodecaster Pro. It's run through some processing to lift the level up to -16 LUFS. That is the standard for podcasting. And then it's pushed straight out to Captivate.fm. And, you know, aside from a little bit of tagging on the file and creating a few images, that's it. I don't like the editing side of things. So Spark of Rebellion, Gaz does it, because I just really don't like it, and Gaz loves it. For Captivate.fm, John Bakinas is our wonderful editor. Jess and I use John for our editing. So you've got to ask yourself, what do you hate about this? Now, the reason that you've got to ask yourself this is that if you're unable to find a way around doing the things that you hate, even if it's this whole, well, you know, even if you dislike something, you've got to grind it out. I get that. But if you can find ways to get around the things that you don't like, hiring an editor, for example, or creating a format of a show that doesn't need editing, believe me, your life in podcasting is going to be nicer. You're going to enjoy it a lot more. And that's the ultimate, okay? We don't want this to turn into a job that we feel we've got to turn up for just to get that content out. I talked about that on the last episode. And the third question that you've got to ask yourself is actually, it's quite an interesting one. And this is a big difference from the last time I recorded a session like this. That question is, where do I want this show to be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 3 years, whatever you see as long term? Where do I want this show to be? Okay, that's not to say that it's got to have the same format, got to have the same publishing schedule as you've got now. It doesn't mean that it's got to stay the same and you can't iterate and change it. But what I'm talking about is, where do you want this show to be? As an example, with the Podcast Accelerator, in 5 years' time, I want this show to be amongst the top 5 podcasts that people listen to for opinions, education, and reactions to industry news, along with people like Evo, my great friend Mr. Evo Terra, along with Pod News for the News, along with our show Captivate, Jess and I, but also along with people like with the guys from Rob Greenlee and Todd Cochran, I forget their name, the New Media Show, of course it is. The New Media Show, people like The Feed from Libsyn, those are industry level shows, as is Captivate, our show, as is Evo, as is this show, the Podcast Accelerator. So I want to be noticed as one of those voices. That's my 5-year goal for this. Even actually, honestly, that's like my 2-month goal for this, because you know me, I like to make a little bit of noise. So ask yourself those 3 questions before rebranding a podcast. And I've got a bonus question for you as well. That bonus question is this. Not only should you ask yourself, what do I love about podcasting? Not only should you ask yourself, what do I hate about podcasting? And not only should you say to yourself, well, where does my show want to be in 5 years? Where do I want that to be? The 4th and bonus question that I want you to ask yourself is this. Very simply, what is my bandwidth for this rebrand? What is my time like right now? Because if you were embarking on a podcast rebrand right at the busiest time throughout your entire calendar year, you are really going to struggle. You are really going to struggle. And the reason for that is clear. You're not going to do it properly. You are just going to change the cover art, and then you're going to change the feed, and that will be it. But that's not okay. Okay, you've got to do more than that, as we're going to talk about for the rest of this month, okay? It's not as easy as logging into your podcast host, Captivate.fm, for example, changing the cover art, changing the feed URL and the titles and the descriptions. No. It can't be that straightforward, because if you're going to rebrand it, you have to give listeners like you've got to give them better. You've got to give them more. You've got to give them higher quality. You've got to give them more value, more entertainment, all right? They deserve it, okay? So treat your listeners like friends. Ask yourself, do I have the bandwidth to do this properly? If you can't dedicate enough time to do it properly, then don't do it yet, all right? Don't do it yet. Now, thank you so much for joining me here on the Podcast Accelerator. Remember to tell all of your podcasting friends that the show is available to listen to for free in any app that supports podcasts. And if you're wondering what the best next step to take for your own podcast is, whether you're a new or a veteran podcaster, well, why not go and take our short 5-minute survey where I'm personally going to help you to diagnose the main issue holding your show back and give you access not only to that solution, but also to our free Vibrant Podcast Rebellion community, my weekly free group coaching, some actionable insider-only emails, and even a free invitation to the Podcast Success Academy. So go ahead today and invest 5 minutes now to grow your podcast by heading to rebelbasemedia.io/grow. And until next time, thank you so much for joining me, and never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.